Healthcare has played an important role in Lansing's life throughout its 150 years and includes in great part the role of the hospital. Betty Lorenz, a Michigan native and a longtime Lansing resident, has been involved with Sparrow Hospital for many years as a volunteer with the Women's Board and in other ways. Betty, what are some of your earliest memories of healthcare and nursing and hospitals in the city?
My first visit was when I was about 8 years old. I stayed at the nurse's residence. My mother had come back to Sparrow to complete her training after my father died at a very early age, and she was privileged to be there. She was the first married woman who had ever been granted that privilege, and she was very successful at what she was doing. And I felt honored to be there. I had a tour of the hospital, and as I recall, it was a quiet place. Everything was quiet. The people all appeared to be very ill, and I think they probably were. And it has changed so drastically, but I remember what good order it was. There was a Miss McClellan who was supervisor of nursing at that time, who just took my mother under her wing, and it kind of settled into my heart, and that's why I've stayed with it. Mm-hmm. But the hospital itself was very orderly and limited. I remember they made deliveries to the back door opposite the stadium that opened right into the lobby. They'd bring crushed ice and, things that would just seem so archaic now. But it's been a wonderful memory.
Do you remember the layout of the hospital?
Yes,
Remember, didn't?
It had a very steep stairway going up the center of the main part of the building, and there was a wing on each end with an open porch, and then the porches were enclosed when they needed more space, and I think it had 4 floors. I remember going there to have my appendix out when I was about 14, and they gave me what was called the president's room. There was a room on the 4th floor that they reserved for special people. They don't do that much anymore. But that is a memory and I remember when it was time to go home after staying in that bed for 10 days, Dora Hoffmeyer came with the ambulance and took me home. And I'll always remember that. I was just a little girl. He was so handsome, and so caring. And those are the kind of memories that, are set in concrete in your mind.
That's what happens with a smaller town.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Then how did you become more involved in the healthcare in Lansing?
Well, when my youngest child got into kindergarten, I thought I've got to have something meaningful to do. So I joined Play Ladies, and I was in that for a long time. And then as it changed, I can't remember the circumstances, but there was a lull in Play Ladies. There was a period of time when it was inactive, and then it was picked up again when Marion Fisher came along. And in the meantime, I joined Junior Division, which was a really nice experience, because at that time they were raising money, but it was for only a short time. Then they broke up when Knapp's no longer had the store. Mm-hmm. And I worked, Carl Newman asked if some of us would take some other responsibilities. Excuse me. So I became involved with an orthopedic clinic that was across the street in that building that was torn down to make room for the parking ramp and that was a marvelous experience, because first of all, we worked upstairs on the, I think it was the 5th floor, and these were all children who were basically being cared for by Medicaid, and they were physically handicapped, not mentally handicapped, but Dr. Johnson at that time was one of the physicians, and it was interesting to work with him. And I learned a lot. And I think that, the learning opportunities have been so valuable. Not that you use them, but when you read something, you know what they're talking about. Or if someone talks about something, you know what it's about. And so I was involved with that. Well, then, as time has gone along, things have become more professional. And I think that they were hiring more people, and we were replaced by professional people, which was appropriate, really. And so then I kind of phased out of that part. Well, it just ended, that's all. We were probably active for, 8 or 9 years in that capacity. And the volunteer part of it has been just a wonderful experience. And when I look back, I think, the volunteer program in Lansing has outlasted a lot of the other things that have gone on, and it still goes strong. I don't think it personally involves as many people. I find they aren't having the responsibilities that we had, but they're getting the job done, I guess.
Well, you're an honorary member of the Women's Board now.
Yes, I am.
But when did you when were you first an active member, and what brought you onto that board?
Well, I received an invitation from, Helen Walter was president, and I received an invitation by mail that I had been nominated, and would I accept, which I did. And the first meeting I went to was in the hospital itself, because the nurses' home had been torn down. It was in 1970.
Where was the nurses' home?
It was at right angles. Well, it's right where the south wing is.
All right.
And it was a very nice building, very nicely furnished, and the women there enjoyed living there as much as they could, really, as hard as they did work. But at any rate, then one of the amusing stories, after the first meeting, I went up to Helen Walter and I thanked her for the invitation, and you will appreciate this, because she had that kind of hysterical little laugh, and she laughed and she said, well, I didn't have anything to do with it.
Just signed the paper.
She just signed the note, or wrote the note. But it was a real experience, because it's changed so drastically. It met at 2:00 in the afternoon, no lunch. Just the meeting, and we met up on the OB floor in a classroom, really, and sat in rows of chairs. The president was up here, and the ladies wore hats and gloves, and the meeting lasted about an hour and 15 minutes, and that was it. And it just, I look back and I think, that was so comical. I think I was the youngest person. I know I was the youngest person in the room. And after that, I was trying to think who came. Ruth Truan came on the board for a little while after I did, and so did Martha Seaman. But they didn't stay.
What were some of your responsibilities on the board?
Well, I was put on committees, just like they do now, although I think we had a little more responsibility, because, well, yourself, you had to take your turn being secretary,
But it was in tune to the times and the needs.
It was. It really was. And of course it expanded terrifically. But it was interesting how they tried to encompass people in the community. They asked, I don't know how many people of other nationalities to come on the board. Well, some came, stayed a short time. It just has never, ever really taken hold. I think now there is only one, and that's the most we've ever had.
But the board is made up of the board of trustees and the women's board are made up of community people.
Oh,
are they
yes,
not?
definitely.
So they can bring different things to the board. What are some of the changes you see taking place in the Lansing hospital world or in Lansing's healthcare?
Well, I think that the hospital has become a more friendly place. I think people go now and with less trepidation. You know, they go to the emergency department, and it's calmed down, and it's a better place to go. And of course, I think that they treat so many people from the outlying areas. Aside from Lansing, Sparrow couldn't depend on just Lansing because our population doesn't call for it. But when you think of the area surrounding the city that we serve, there are a lot of people, awfully lot of people. And when they had that open house for the new building, I talked to a young man who was in charge of the chocolate fountain, and he was kind of at loose ends because he wasn't doing much business. And so I visited with him a few minutes, and he, he said, well, it's interesting to see all these people come in, but he said, where did they all come from? And we talked about that a little bit, and I said, well, these are all Lansing people who are interested in what's been going on here, and they want to see it. And I said, I'm interested. I'm always interested when I come. I said, tell me, what policy have they developed here in regard to all of the people who for years have come to the Sparrow emergency room and because there's no place else to go. I mean, they would get people who were drunk and people who were, just not with it. And he said, oh, we still take care of them. And I said, well, how do you do it in this facility? And he said, well, we give them a blanket and they can sleep on the sofas in the lobby. He said, as long as they're not drunk and they're not disorderly, he said, we let them sleep there. And I thought, well, that's something that the people in the community should realize, that is going on, that they are welcome. And he said, we give them coffee and hot chocolate, and he said, sometimes we give them food. So you have to talk to people in the hospital to find out really what is going on. But I can see where so many things have improved when people couldn't go in and I talked to someone the other day who had hip surgery on a Tuesday and went home Thursday. And I said, that's just unheard of. Not that many years ago. You just couldn't possibly do that. So this person didn't want to go to Adobe and didn't want to go to Tender Care. She said, I want to go home. So that's where she went. But I think that people have a nicer feeling about the hospital. It isn't such a dreaded place.
Yeah. Remember, you couldn't visit people in the hospital
only certain hours.
Certain hours. So a lot of restrictions have changed.
Even your children. I can remember when our children were there having their tonsils out, you could only go certain hours in the afternoon and in the evening.
Things have changed a lot.
And it was a traumatic thing for children back then. I remember it was hard in play ladies. Children would cry, mama, mama, and you had to try and fill the gap.
Our audience might not know what play ladies, what kind of service it provided and what junior division provided. So we'll kind of go back.
Well, play ladies originally were designed just to provide play materials. We had leather work, because these were all children under 12. From infancy, really. We had 1 and 2 year olds. And all kinds of play equipment, games depending on the age of the child, and lots of reading. And rocking chairs. In fact, I was trying to think of the name of the family that every Christmas gave us a new rocking chair. You'd know them. They were in the automotive business. They had a store down across the corner from Lorenz. Ginny. Oh, anyway. They were very interested in pediatrics, and we were always busy. We always stayed longer than we were supposed to stay, and sometimes we helped feed them.
And what about junior division?
And junior division was a money-making group. They, as I said, sponsored NAPS Day, which was very beneficial money-wise. I can't recall offhand how much money we were making, but it was very well done. And the last time we had junior division at NAPS, the man whose family owned NAPS at that time from Grand Rapids, he died quite recently, and Stuart Mott came over to NAPS Day, and he was a single man at the time, and he was dressed rather inappropriately in real sporty clothes, but he was happy to be there. And before he left, he said, "I wonder if I could have a bag of those cookies to take home with me." And they just made the day. You know, everybody got such a kick out of that. But they had people demonstrating that day, all different types of things, people modeling. I had a lovely tea table, and it was a very community type of thing. And I think when that was over, they did some folding, but that wasn't good for that group. These were younger women, and they just weren't ready to sit down and fold bandages and do that kind of thing.
Well, good. You've given us some good ideas about the health care and the hospital, and I appreciate it.
Well, I'm as sold on it as I was in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And the more time goes by, the more I appreciate Carl Newman. He is absolutely the outstanding leader during my time there.
And his outreach into the community, too.
Yes, he did it.
Of Lansing.
He was such a gentleman, and he didn't beg. When I was on the foundation committee, and Carl was there, Bob Fisher was chairman, I remember one year, and he was all gung-ho to go out in the community and ask this one for this and somebody else for something else. And Carl said, "No, we're not going to do it that way. We're not going to beg." And I always admired him for that, because I think there's so much of it that goes on and has been going on, and people don't like it. There's a way to get people to help without begging.
And Carl knew that the example was the hospital itself, and people could support it.
That's right.
Which you're still doing.
Right.
And the community appreciates it, and we appreciate your coming.
Well, I enjoy every minute of it. Thank you. Now I get John over here.
I don't know how we turn it off. No.